Good afternoon. I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 32 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. For those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. I think it's only members attending by Zoom, so I think they know how to use the Zoom feature, so I won't go too much into that. Before speaking, please wait until I recognise you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted by the committee on January 20, 2022, the committee is commencing its study of North Atlantic right whales. With us today are witnesses from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Mr. Adam Burns, Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Harbour Management, and of course no stranger to the committee. And we have Brett Gilchrist, Director, National Programmes, Fisheries and Harbour Management. Thank you for taking time to appear. You have 5 minutes for an opening statement when you're ready. I'd like to also, of course, welcome Mr. Bazan by Zoom, new to the committee, and as well Mr. Droyne, joining us in person as a substitute today. So again, 5 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and hello to members of the committee. First, I should take a moment to acknowledge the very difficult situation in Atlantic Canada resulting from Hurricane Fiona. The Department is working diligently to respond to this crisis as quickly as possible. En ce qui concerne le sujet d'aujourd'hui,
with regard to today's topic, all whale species found in Canada, including North Atlantic right whales, face threats directly attributable to human activity.
Are now listed under the Species at Risk Act, of which 8 are assessed as endangered. Species like North Atlantic right whales and others listed under the Species at Risk Act face a complex and interrelated mix of threats from human activities that affect their survival and recovery. These threats include entanglement in fishing gear, disturbance from and interaction with vessels, and decreased prey availability. Threats are becoming even more acute as a result of climate change and its impact on ocean ecosystems and whale distribution. As committee members will know, North Atlantic right whales have shifted their late spring and summer foraging grounds to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they face greater risk of vessel strike and entanglement in fishing gear. Over the past several years, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Transport Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Parks Canada have worked together to make targeted investments to address immediate threats facing North Atlantic right whales and other endangered whale species, including $167.4 million under the Whales Initiative announced in Budget 2018. The Whales Initiative was the first targeted national whale fund to protect key species. It was further supported by additional funds found in the Oceans Protection Plan and Nature Legacy initiatives. These investments started a shift in the way fisheries operate, with a focus on innovative tools that protect North Atlantic right whales and other species, while also demonstrating the role of fisheries in a blue economy and Canada's leadership in sustainable seafood. The North Atlantic right whale population is in decline and estimated at approximately 336 animals. Over the past several years, Fisheries and Oceans Canada has been working with harvesters to implement a range of measures to halt the decline of this species and in turn allow our important fisheries and fishing communities to coexist with them. Our priority is to support the recovery of this population by preventing entanglements. To do this, we've implemented changes to the seasonal open and close dates of fisheries to avoid interactions with right whales. This includes targeted ice-breaking operations in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to help harvesters get out on the water as early in the spring as possible. We've also implemented one of the world's most advanced and near real-time area closure programs to remove fishing gear, such as lobster and snow crab gear, where and when right whales are detected in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. This includes temporary and season-long fishing area closures. These measures are supported by a comprehensive monitoring regime to detect the presence of whales in our waters, including flights, vessels, and acoustic monitoring. To reduce the threat of serious injury in the event a whale is entangled, the Department's working with the fishing industry and partners in Atlantic Canada and Quebec to develop whale-safe fishing gear. These include systems that fish without vertical lines, preventing whales from becoming entangled in the gear, as well as other innovations that incorporate low breaking strength links. These links are designed to fish under normal conditions and yet break if a large whale should become entangled. Trials of such gear have been underway over the past few years, and the Department's $20 million Whale Safe Gear Adoption Fund is providing support to nearly 36 projects this year. The expertise developed by harvesters and experts under the Whale Safe Gear Adoption Fund has been central to the development of our approach to implement requirements for whale safe gear in commercial fisheries, with an implementation beginning in 2023, focused on protecting whales, the operational realities of the fishing industry, and ensuring the safety of harvesters. Also, since 2019, the Department, through its Ghost Gear Fund, has invested $16.7 million through contribution agreements to assist Indigenous groups, fish harvesters, the aquaculture industry, non-government organizations, and communities to take concrete action in the fight against ghost gear. Through Budget 2022, the Ghost Gear Fund received $10 million to continue retrieval activities, support responsible disposal, and pilot new technology to reduce ghost gear. The fishing gear reporting system was developed and launched in 2021 that allows commercial harvesters to conveniently input a description of their lost gear and its location from any online device. Canada just recently became the first country in the world to share its lost and retrieved gear reporting data through the Global Ghost Gear Initiative's Global Data Portal, the world's largest freely available repository of ghost gear data, again showcasing Canada as a world leader in conservation strategies. The government also continues to build the Marine Mammal Response Program, which aims to assist marine mammals, including North Atlantic right whales and sea turtles, in distress. In collaboration with conservation groups and non-governmental organizations, the Department supports marine mammal incident response networks in all regions through this program. Our investments in the Marine Mammal Response Program include $4.5 million in contributions to build capacity for safe and effective marine mammal response across Canada, as well as $1 million annually in operational support for our response partners. With our ongoing and regular engagement of harvesters, industry groups, right whale experts, our counterparts in the United States, and others, we've seen positive signs. For example, there have been no reported North Atlantic right whale mortalities in Canadian waters over the past 3 years. At the same time, there have been new right whale entanglements identified in both Canadian and U.S. waters, including 4 new entanglements first observed in Canadian waters this year. I should note that until a full investigation is conducted by the Department of the gear when it is retrieved, the origin of the gear cannot be determined and could therefore be of Canadian or American origin. Fisheries management will continue to evolve and adapt to protect and conserve North Atlantic right whale populations as well as other populations which are at risk. Recent analysis by one of our research partners, the Canadian Wildlife Federation, has estimated that our temporary closures to protect right whales have reduced the threat of entanglement by about 65% for the southern Gulf snow crab fishery alone. Adding this to other measures we have implemented in this fishery, including the retrieval of lost and abandoned fishing gear, further reduces the risk of entanglement of right whales to about 82%, by about 82%. Our world-class adaptive management measures, which incorporate the best available science, are developed through close collaboration between our department, the fishing industry, Indigenous communities, and leading scientists to protect and rebuild the endangered whale populations while upholding Canada's reputation for sustainably sourced seafood. We recognize there's more work to be done and that it's not easy. We need to recognize the significant work and innovation that has happened to date to protect right whales by our fishing industry. At the same time, we will only see long-term recovery of the population when there are no entanglements or deaths over multiple years. The strength in Canada's strategy to protect right whales is in our ability to adapt and evolve based on science through working with harvesters and experts. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. A little bit over, but I wanted to make sure you got your statement on the record. We'll now go to our rounds of questioning. Before I do recognise the first questioner, I will say we will be going in camera for the last 30 minutes to give time to switch over and do some committee business after that. So we'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming on what is a relatively short notice and our determination to do this study, important study. Can the witnesses, and I'll just say the witnesses because I'm not sure who to direct it to, tell me, since 2017, how many right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence or off of Nova Scotia have been entangled in lobster gear?
Thanks for the question, and we have not identified any entanglements resulting from lobster gear.
Thank you. And how many in crab gear?
I have the data. Do you have the total number?
Yes. So entanglements, when they do occur, require an investigation to determine what the origin of the fishing gear is. We are adamant that unless that investigation is conclusive, we believe that it can't be identified or linked to a particular gear type. Snow crab fishery has been linked to one entanglement formally, which was last year, right whale number 615. The snow crab gear.
I'll go on to my next question while you search for the number. Is that the number?
Yeah, so it's a question of how many entanglements we've observed in Canadian waters versus how many we've conclusively determined to be of Canadian origin.
Okay.
And so those would be two different numbers.
So this summer, and I do appreciate the evolution of the policy where we have this revolving or moving transit zone prohibition so it doesn't completely close the fishing season, and we do support that policy. But in this summer, when you rightly closed the Bay of Fundy, where near Tiverton, when there was a sighting, the policy announcement said that all commercial fishing gear, lobster, any other that had fixed line in it, should be removed, except indigenous gear. Can you indicate to me how a right whale knows not to get itself entangled in indigenous fishing gear, but is exposed to being entangled in commercial gear?
So that was specifically related to food, social, and ceremonial activities, and regional colleagues are currently working with Indigenous communities in the area, in the Bay of Fundy, to ensure.
Ceremonial fishery under law cannot be done if there is a conservation measure being put in place. And the department put in a conservation measure to protect the right whales, but yet still allowed food ceremonial fishery as an exposed risk for right whales.
So regional colleagues are currently, well, not at this moment, but are actively working with Indigenous communities in the Bay of Fundy.
It doesn't help the commercial fishermen who were told to stay off the water while Indigenous fishers were exposing the right whales. But I'll move on to my next question. So if I understand, you've got one instance over 4 or 5 years of that you can confirm of crab gear being entangled. Your former colleague in DFO, Alan Billard, I think I pronounced his name correctly, he actually lives in my riding, he's a DFO scientist for over 30 years on whale science, has written that right whales fall asleep quite often. That's part of their habit. They fall asleep and they float when they do. So in determining the ship strikes that you've claimed are the reason for the deaths, are the scientists aware that right whales sleep on the top of the water?
So in terms of our specific numbers and the accounting in terms of identifying blunt force trauma as the source of mortality, that would only have been made following examination of a carcass. And so we would have, in that process, confirmed that the animal in question is indeed dead.
Well, one of the right whales that was examined several years ago, in the year where I think 12 right whales died over 2 years, I think had been listed as having lived for 40 years, but actually had numerous evidence of ship strikes. And so I'm wondering why, in some cases, the necropsy shows ship strikes that didn't kill them, and supposedly somehow a further determination was ship strikes did kill them. They also do follow their food path up into the Labrador Strait. They do get frozen in the ice when they can't surface. So how do you determine when a whale dies whether it was one that had already had multiple collisions or one that had basically died by being frozen into the ice?
Yeah, so the necropsies that are conducted when it's feasible, when the animal is able to be brought to shore to be necropsied in a location that's safe, those necropsies are conducted by veterinarians. And so those are, professional, trained scientific opinions of the cause of mortality, which are intended to identify the specific cause of death. And in the case of those animals from 2017, many were undetermined in terms of the specific cause of death. In other cases, there were some that, for example, suspected blunt force trauma.
We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have liked to have been there physically with you today for the beginning of this study, but I'm pleased that you're all there. And I'd also like to take a minute to salute my colleagues from Atlantic Canada and Eastern Quebec who have been affected by the hurricane. We were a bit lucky in my riding. It passed near us, but not over us. But we're with you. Mr. Burns, Mr. Gilchrist, thank you for being there today. I have many questions for you. As you know, right whales are part of my landscape since 2017 in my riding, when lobster and crab fishermen are in that region in large numbers. My first question, and feel free to answer in French or English, in the past few weeks we've seen that many environmental groups, particularly in the U.S., have referred to the fact that our measures on right whales were inadequate and said they simply should never buy crab or lobster or even any other fish from our regions. I'd like to know, what are you doing with your counterparts in the U.S. or environmental groups so that those people know what our measures are that have been put in place since 2017? What are your communication channels, and how do you explain to all these people how avant-garde we are, both in the government and in the entire industry since that year?
Thanks, and I will respond to this one in English just so that I get it clearly stated. So we work very closely with colleagues in the U.S. as well as various environmental groups to make sure that Canada's measures are clearly understood. And we continue to do that both here in Canada but also in the United States. In particular, the consulate in Boston and the Consul General there is actively involved as well, reaching out to Congress and to the U.S. Senate to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that our measures are well understood. When it comes to the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch findings recently, Canada worked to ensure that they had the necessary information to make a fair and balanced assessment of Canada's management regime. Unfortunately, we do not believe that they took all of that into consideration in their findings, and did not recognize the differences in Canada's regime from those in the U.S. But we continue to reach out to all of those organizations to ensure that the great work that the Canadian industry and indeed that Canada has done to protect North Atlantic right whales in Canada is well understood by those groups.
Okay.
Okay. Since 2017, I've been working closely with all the groups in my region, whether they be fishermen, environmental groups we have here. Since 2017, extraordinary work has been done. There's a good understanding of the migration of right whales, which are increasingly present in our region. That has affected the functioning of our fishery, and the model we'd had for many years was completely put into upheaval, and many people had to adapt. When it comes to the measures, in your opinion, are our measures, or the ones we've had since 2017 to present, are those measures better than what they have in the U.S. right now to protect the right whale? Or are we still lagging behind the measures that exist in the U.S.?
Donc, je ne suis
I'm no scientific expert, to examine the U.S. measures, but I can tell you that the Canadian measures are up to world standards. They're exceptionally good.
That, for example, the Pew Charitable Trust, a U.S. ENGO, I believe it was 2021, when Canada announced its measures, did note that the U.S. Measures could benefit from trying to mirror some of the measures put in place in Canada. So I can point that out, but wouldn't want to be evaluating those measures myself.
OK. Mais si je me trompe,
If I'm not mistaken, what we've been trying to do since 2017 are many-fold. First of all, certainly protect the right whale. Make sure there's no more mortality or as little as possible. And the second thing, which has been repeated daily or every year anyway, is that our measures should comply or be up to the standard of what the Americans would like to see. Am I wrong when I think that?
Yeah, so the member's referring to the U.S. Marine Mammal Protection Act, which requires that any country that exports seafood products to the U.S. demonstrate comparability to the protections in place in the United States to protect marine mammals, not specific to North Atlantic right whales, but in the case of snow crab and lobster, the U.S. has identified North Atlantic right whales as the key risk. And while we don't have to have the same measures in place, we do need to have measures that have a comparable outcome in terms of protecting North Atlantic right whales. And so that is the basis of some of the numbers that I made reference to in my opening remarks, where in the case of the Gulf snow crab fishery, we've reduced the risk of entanglement by at least 82%, based on some modeling, which certainly has its own limitations, but it's that the U.S., amongst other things, looks at in determining that comparability. But indeed, the statement that one of the drivers for the protections we've put in place is the U.S. Marine Mammal Protection Act is absolutely true.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Your 6 minutes are up. We'll get to you again, I'm sure. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Desbiens for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will ask you questions that may seem similar to Mr. Cormier's, because I'm wondering, or I was very sensitive to what Mr. Cormier told us about the U.S. We saw the U.S., well, I'm saying the U.S., but influential groups in the U.S., environmental groups. I was wondering if there was a tool in your department for counter-propaganda, particularly some kind of leverage in terms of marketing, our ability to be cooperative from an environmental standpoint. Is there some kind of marketing précis to disseminate that our measures are good? Well, it was the Monterey Bay Aquarium that examined Canadian fisheries and said these things. We work closely with our government colleagues in the U.S. government. They don't conduct that kind of evaluation of our measures. And we think we have measures that are at least comparable to the American ones, at least equivalent. With regards to marketing, we work with the industry. For example, the Lobster Council, to try to find ways with them to have marketing that's similar to that of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. In your opinion, is there a budget that could make a difference if it was attached to that, insofar as we're compared to a giant, the USA, that has different means than we do, of course, but should we increase the budgets available to improve our performance in marketing? Are good measures? Well, we have programs that could help the Canadian industry. For instance, I don't know the Atlantic Fisheries Fund, for instance, could be one, depending on the program that wants money, but our main approach is to work with the industry so that they can do their own marketing in line with their own priorities. I imagine that good behavior is mentioned when it comes to proper measures. I suppose that there are awards or recompense given to some harvesters more than others. Could something be put in place? Could we have something like saying that crab fishermen have been exemplary and have improved the statistics about whale mortality? I'm a layperson, but is there any kind of reward for good behavior is what I'm asking. I would say that the fisheries industry cooperation overall, be it the snow crab fishery, lobster, or what have you, we have excellent cooperation from every corner of the industry. So I couldn't tell you whether one is better than another. All of it is very good. Of course, we do work hard to try to make various American groups understand the measures we have that are exceptional in Canada. Do I have any time left? Yes? I'd like to get back to the behavior of the harvesters. It seems exemplary. They are making major efforts. Do you do some kind of evaluation of the repercussions or consequences on human beings of these measures? Because they experience a lot of stress. Did you assess the human aspect of this effort? There's no doubt that the measures have an impact on the harvesters. And it costs them money, too. You cannot say the opposite, but the way we try to minimize that impact is to work with them every year. We have a roundtable with the industry to try to identify the measures that have the greatest impact on them in order to find different approaches that would still protect the right whale but minimize the impact on the industry. So it's really the industry that's expert on identifying the measures that impact them the most and how we could do things differently. Thank you, Ms. Desbiens.
For 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, first of all, it's timely that we're looking at the study with our friends to the east with Hurricane Fiona that recently hit, and just wanted to express my thoughts as somebody who was born and raised in Newfoundland and now a proud West Coaster, that I'm sending my thoughts out to everybody on the East Coast. But to the topic at hand, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and sharing with us updates around this important topic. I'm looking at a chart in front of me, and in it, it has some numbers laid out around the mandatory reporting of lost gear to DFO that has been implemented in all areas since 2020. And I'm hoping you could help me understand some of the pieces here. I'm looking at, for example, in Newfoundland and Labrador, it says number of lost gear reports filed is 33. The number of gear units reported lost, 263, and the number of gear units retrieved, 181. I'm wondering if you can highlight the process that a fisher or whomever would take to file a report, the process of reporting lost gear, and the barriers in retrieving that gear, because as you can see, the numbers don't align.
Thank you. So we have a tool that's available to fish harvesters electronically to allow them to easily report lost fishing gear and promptly. When that report is done or submitted by a fish harvester, the department receives that report, and we process that report as soon as possible to determine if there's a retrieval activity that can happen. in the near term by the department or through our partners. As my colleague Adam Burns mentioned, we've had a ghost gear retrieval program that's been in place for the last 2 years. There was another announcement for $10 million to retrieve additional gear with our partners, Indigenous and harvesters, commercial harvesters, and experts in retrieving gear. And we use those reports once they're submitted to retrieve gear. The challenge is sometimes the gear can't be retrieved. Sometimes it can be, and in some cases the harvesters are in season able to retrieve the gear themselves. So sometimes the amount of gear reported lost doesn't end up being the amount of gear that's left in the water. And our goal is to retrieve all of that gear, of course, because lost gear is, and this is something Canada's mentioned in the international community as well, lost gear is a major source of impact for marine mammals, including endangered whale species. So working with our industry to retrieve that gear is a priority.
Thank you. I guess what are the, because there's quite a low number, although it's all in perspective, I guess, but it appears to be a low number of those who are reporting the initial lost gear. And I'm wondering what the incentives are for those to report it. And then also, are there any accountability mechanisms in place to follow up? Because this is one thing I'm hearing over and over, is that accountability is missing in many of these ghost gear initiatives that are happening.
So we do have accountability at this point, but it is a relatively new program, and the fact that Canada is the first one to share lost gear reporting in the world suggests that it's a developing program, and in fact, we're ahead of the game. When it comes to reporting of lost gear, our harvesters are focused obviously on not losing their gear, but the reporting tool itself is relatively new. So those numbers have been increasing annually. There's incentives for harvesters to report lost fishing gear. A perfect example is market bodies like Seafood Watch and Marine Stewardship Council watching very closely what our harvesters do and taking note of something like lost gear reports. And then there's and the impact on their bottom line, their ability to sell their product. But the other incentives are our fishing gear for example, lobster and crab are marked. So if we lose the fishing gear and someone comes across, say, an entangled whale, that gear is marked based on the fishery that it came from. We want to do that because we obviously want to take note of gear that's been lost. And harvesters know that. They know that the gear has been marked. They want to contribute to the lost gear reporting system. So that's in particular lobster and crab, fixed gear fisheries like that. But it's also marked because we want to distinguish between Canadian gear and, for example, U.S. gear. It's not uncommon for whales to be entangled and to transit both borders. So we don't want to be identified as a source of gear in Canadian waters when the entanglement may have happened elsewhere. So marking of gear is a motivating factor, of course, as well for industry to say, hey, I should report this. And we are seeing an increase in numbers, and it's in reporting. The uptake has been relatively quick, considering the program has been in place for a very short time in the fisheries world.
Thank you. I forgot to set my timer, Chair. How much time do I have left?
10 seconds.
Minute, 10 seconds. Okay, let's see. Can you provide high level, I know you spoke about the consultation process that's happening with First Nations, with harvesters, with fishers, and so on. What's been the impacts on these closures, both, the most recent closures that you're hearing? What are, say, the top 4 impacts that you've been seeing that you could share?
So certainly, broadly speaking, we would note that, in particular in the crab fisheries that tend to be most impacted, the vast majority of the quota continues to be caught each year. That's not to say that there aren't additional economic implications for harvesters who may have to travel further to complete their quotas and what have you. And as I say, it's those types of impacts that we're continuing to work with industry on. We want to hear other innovative solutions they might have. Clearly, though, ones that won't reduce the level of protection for North Atlantic right whales. So it really is working with industry to find that sweet spot, if you will.
We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, with my colleagues, been watching from the West Coast is what's happening on the East Coast, and our thoughts go out to everyone affected by the storm. I've got a series of about 8 or 9 questions here I'd like to go through. I'll keep my prologue short, if you can keep your answers as short as possible, so hopefully we can get through them. What type of DFO and Coast Guard vessels are used to observe right whale-related measures in the Gulf of St. Lawrence?
For our detection program, we use aerial platforms like planes from Transport Canada, DFO Science, and Conservation Protection. We also have acoustic monitoring devices, buoys in the water to constantly listen for right whales, and DFO, Coast Guard, and Conservation Protection assets, vessels on the water. So it's all hands on deck.
Okay, I'd asked for what type of vessels, so if you could provide details in a written response later, that would be appreciated. As right whale measures have been increased, has there been a corresponding increase in DFO's budget allocations for the Conservation and Protection branch to enforce the new measures?
Yes, there has been under Whales Initiative 1.0. $167.4 million was allocated to the protection of right whales and 2 other species. And of that, approximately $700,000 is allocated to our conservation protection officials for surveillance, for example, use of planes to monitor for right whales.
Okay, thank you. In 2019, the federal government awarded PAL Aerospace a 5-year contract to provide aircraft assistance enforcement of right whale measures. Is that correct?
That is likely linked to that $700K.
Okay, thank you. What other nations have performed surveillance flights over or around the Gulf of St. Lawrence or other Canadian waters to observe whether right whale measures are being complied with?
Only one, and that would be NOAA in the United States.
Okay, so NOAA has been doing surveillance flights. Does DFO have adequate resources to perform the surveillance and enforcement of right whale measures?
So we do believe that we are deploying a sufficient number of assets to see, a large number of the right whales, especially with the acoustic monitoring as well now in place.
Okay, if that is the case, then why would the Americans also have surveillance over our waters?
The U.S. Undertakes surveillance for other reasons as well. It's not specifically to administer our program. They have a very active scientific program of tracking each individual animal for other purposes other than just protecting them in this way. And indeed, the methodologies that they use when they're in our waters are meant to identify all of the animals in a particular aggregation, which isn't information that we need to administer our closure protocols. If we see one whale, we act the same as if there's 10.
Okay, are you aware of anywhere else that the Americans perform overflight surveillance of Canadian waters or territory to observe whether Canadians are abiding by regulations?
So again, they're not undertaking this surveillance for that purpose. They're doing it for scientific collaboration purposes, and I believe that from time to time, Canadian scientists are part of that work as well.
Does DFO or any other branch of Canadian government perform surveillance flights over U.S. waters or territories to observe their regulatory compliance?
We do indeed perform some aerial surveillance, for example, in the North Pacific, looking for IUU activity there. So yes, we do that as well.
International waters or U.S. waters as well?
I don't believe it would be in U.S. waters, but again, the surveillance that's being conducted in Canadian waters by the U.S. NOAA plane is not for enforcement or surveillance purposes. It's for scientific activities.
Okay, thank you. Little different subject line now here. What other Canadian fisheries operations are you aware of that have been targeted by foreign ENGOs, like this one from Monterey Bay?
Certainly the seal harvest is another one that often gets attention from various groups in other countries as well.
Is the government taking any counter-communicative action against these activities that are impacting our Canadian fisheries?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I noted, we are working to make sure that various groups in the U.S., including, for example, the Pew Charitable Trusts, which have now put out, or last year put out something in support of Canada's measures.
What about the European ban on pinnipeds?
Time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier again for 5 minutes or less, please.
So I just want to go back to the MMPA for just a second. So Mr. Bernard Gilchrist, I think we all know since 2017, a couple of things that we want to achieve is no more, death of whales, protecting the habitat, everything like that, but also is to comply with the MMPA, right? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So like we're talking about the measure that we put in place since 2017, and I think you said that are not sure if the U.S. have strict measure compared to us. But how do we gonna, do this comply with the MMPA? Is it a process of just like, having a discussion with our counterpart in the U.S. saying like, this is our measure, this is what we've done since 2017, and we think we should, be able to continue like, fishing and comply under the MMPA. I just want to make sure that everybody understand the process around like complying with the MMPA.
So certainly part of it is indeed ensuring an appropriate and complete understanding of the measures that Canada's put in place. In specific terms, though, with the U.S. MMPA legislation, it also requires that the level of mortality, and they attribute partial mortality to an entangled whale, even if it is successfully disentangled subsequently. And the level of mortality needs to be below what the U.S. terms the potential biological removal, which is a scientific calculation based on the population. Mm-hmm. It's not a metric that we use domestically for management purposes, but it is one that we have calculated because it is central to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And in the case of this species, because the species goes from the U.S. to Canada, it's a single number, which is revised each year, but is below 1. And so what that means...
So in your opinion, Mr. Byrne, do we, if I'm using the good term in English, do we comply, or are we going to be okay under the MMPA with the measure that we have in place so far?
Yeah, we're very confident that we will. Certainly, we're not taking anything for granted. We continue to undertake outreach to the U.S. administration as well as to environmental groups in the U.S., but we're confident that our measures are world class and certainly meet the comparability standard.
So we I know the industry are working closely with all of you in different meetings, and one thing we hear also is that I'm not going to say the excuses, but the reason that you maybe like give most of the time to not like relax the measure, if I can say, is that we will not comply with the MMPA and maybe other like issues like that. But is that true that NOAA has to give us an advice before if we complied or not, or if we're not complying with the MMPA before they can shut down the fishery? Because it seems that we're using a lot of excuses not to release the measure. But if we relax the measure, and if NOAA of the U.S. are looking at us and well, maybe this is something that you should not have done. We're giving you the advice to re-put the measure in place. Like, is that true that NOAA has to give us an advice before? So
certainly Canada maintains its sovereignty over the management of its fisheries, and we do not seek permission or approval from the U.S. for the measures that we put in place. That being said, if we were to relieve measures, reduce measures, and an entanglement were to occur, or we were to have a year like 2017 where a number of animals were killed, and some of them as a result of fishing gear entanglements, that would certainly be detrimental to Canada's engagement with the U.S. on the MMPA front. And so, we believe that we've worked very carefully with industry as we've worked to administer these measures. I will note we're not just guided by this U.S. legislation. Of course, the North Atlantic right whale is an animal that is endangered and listed under the Species at Risk Act as well. And so we are not just implementing these measures because the U.S. has told us to do so. We are implementing these measures because our own domestic legislation requires us to do so as well under the Species at Risk requirements. And so even if it weren't for the U.S. MMPA, we would certainly still be required by Canadian legislation to implement these protections.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also forgotten to salute all our friends from the Magdalen Islands in particular that were affected by Hurricane Fiona. Our thoughts are with them and those of other regions as well, of course. In the St. Lawrence, we follow the beluga in particular because they are in danger. There are many whales that come to our shores, blue whales. Most of them are identified and followed now. We know their behavior. They even have first names. So we're trying to follow their behavior. Is that an approach that you use? Because we met with harvesters in the Magdalen Islands who told us there was traceability to give them more predictability. Is that something you've considered?
The measures we have in place to observe North Atlantic right whales also identify other species of whales, and certainly that information is feeding into our scientific understanding of their behavior and of their distribution as well. And even, I would add, the seasonal closures that we implement as a result of
With regard to the right whale, the parallel I wanted to draw with the right whale is if we can follow belugas in the St. Lawrence and anticipate when they will get to the St. Lawrence and be able to do the whale watching, can we understand the behavior of the right whale better and identify that it's the same whales that go to the same places, let's say? It's really a question for my colleagues who are scientists, but I can say that according to the information we have and that has come to us since 2017, every year we get more and better understanding of what we can observe among right whales, and that will continue to improve every year. But it's still true that their distribution is a little different every year, so it's still necessary to have adaptive measures that respond to that year's distribution.
Now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. To the witnesses, I was just actually Googling, trying to make sure my information was most up to date. But what I'm trying to understand is, so Seafood Watch makes a statement saying that both Canada and the U.S. management measures do not go far enough in protecting North Atlantic right whales. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on those statements that have been made and perhaps clarify, because it doesn't coincide with the information that I'm hearing from you today.
So, I won't sit here and explain their finding. We disagree with it. We believe that the protections that we have in place in the snow crab and lobster fisheries in Canada are world-class and do indeed achieve an absolutely high-quality level of protection of North Atlantic right whales. And it's not just me that's saying that. Our statistics that show that we have dramatically reduced the rate of entanglement and mortality in Canadian waters speaks for itself. But equally, it's easy for me to sit here and say the work that we have done is excellent, but so have other groups like, and I've mentioned it before, but for example, the Pew Charitable Trust and many Canadian ENGOs who have also independently said that Canada's measures are indeed exceptional. And so we disagree with their findings and think that in part they have painted us with a single brush. The Canadian, for example, the Canadian and U.S. lobster fisheries are very different in terms of the season lengths. Ours are a few weeks long. The U.S. is much longer. The amount of gear is on orders of magnitude different. And the location where the fishing is occurring is largely in waters where we almost never see North Atlantic right whales. We do occasionally, so we need measures to protect them should they show up in those shallow waters. But all of those attributes are extremely different from the U.S., and we believe that were that to have been fully understood, a different outcome would have been achieved. And let me assure you, we did everything we could to try to ensure that they understood that. But unfortunately, their focus, I think, was on the attributes of U.S. fisheries, and that appears to have been applied more broadly to us as well.
We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess some of your comments about the ANGOs and the Pew Foundation, you've mentioned it several times now. It really begs more questions about how DFO works with ANGOs. Meanwhile, we've wanted Department of Fisheries and Oceans to be working with our anglers and to have a seat at the table, but they're being ignored. I'll get into the study. The study is here. The part that we're referencing is a Monterey Bay Aquarium, of all things, Seafood Watch report. And I'll just, what are our American colleagues saying about it? So an American ANGO, the California Bay Seafood Watch, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch gave the red rating to the U.S. and Canadian lobster industry, saying they aren't doing enough to protect the Atlantic right whale, as we've been talking about. But what concerns me always, especially about marine protection areas or marine protected areas, is when it's politicized. And we've seen it politicized on the West Coast. We've seen it politicized on the East Coast. And so what are the Americans saying about this particular report? Well, the Maine Democrats and Republicans, and I'm citing an article from the Spectrum News this year, just a few weeks ago, Maine Democrats and Republicans blasted Seafood Watch for its rating. Seafood Watch is misleading consumers and businesses with this designation, Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat, said in a statement. Generations of Maine lobstermen have worked hard to protect the sustainability of the lobster fishery, and they have taken unprecedented steps to protect right whales. Efforts that the federal government and now Seafood Watch have failed to recognize. It goes on to reflect on a Republican's opinion. Republican former Governor Paul LePage also said in a statement, as governor, again, I will push back at organizations falsely attacking our lobster industry, as well as the Biden administration's destructive regulatory policy aimed at destroying the livelihoods of our fishermen over the false notion they are harming whales. And so it sounds eerily familiar to what's happening to our anglers on the West Coast around salmon. When we know they're plentiful in the water, but there's still closures that have been mandated by this Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So what do our Canadians have to say about this? Well, I'm quoting an article called Blaming Canada's Lobster Industry for North Atlantic Right Whales Plight Unfair. It is plain fact that there has never been a single documented right whale death linked to Canadian lobster gear in recent history, as was reflected by my colleague's question before. There are several reasons why lobster fishing represents a lower risk in Canada. It's an inshore fishery conducted mostly in shallow waters of less than 20 fathoms. A fathom is 6 feet, so about, do the math, where the right whales are rarely observed. So we're talking about 120 feet. You referred to that. We already know that. The whales just aren't there. The article continues. For more than 150 years, North America's lobster fishery has proven itself to be one of the most sustainable wild fisheries on the planet. For all of us on both sides of the Canada-U.S. border who care deeply about its future, and the path forward is clear. And I'll remind the people listening today, there's people connected with these jobs that are lost as a result of a poor scientific report put out by this organization. Tens of thousands of fishing families, and I'll repeat that, tens of thousands of fishing families, plant workers, and hundreds of coastal communities depend on setting the record straight and winning this fight. Lastly, second, we need to stand up and push back on what Seafood Watch represents, activism masquerading as science. And we just had a whole study talking about that exact thing. They lumped all fixed gear fisheries into one basket with blatant disregard of the facts and lacking peer review validation. Cooler heads must prevail. We need more science and less politics, more binational collaboration and less finger pointing, ensuring a sustainable future for the right whale and addressing the threats facing them. Knows no borders and needs to be addressed binationally. So I guess my question to you, why would the Department of Fisheries and Oceans be working with angles like the ones mentioned and you even referred to, rather than the anglers themselves?
Thanks for the question, and we absolutely do work very closely with the fishing industry on these issues. We have regular consultation with them. We're engaged with them in various whale safe gear trials. We work with them on our Ghost Gear initiative. Indeed, they participate in some instances in marine mammal response activities.
I can speak from a person from the West Coast. When we talk to the angling community, we ask, what's the relationship like with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans? And they say it's non-existent. They used to have a seat at the table where they were consulted regularly. Now they're completely disregarded. And it appears the place at their table, at the DFO, is now taken up by the Angos, as you've mentioned.
Your time has gone over, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr.
Right. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier again for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, we talked about everything we needed to do to ensure that we had measures that were strict enough in order not to have whale mortality, to improve our relationship with the U.S. But since 2018, we had a zone as of April 28th that was practically closed to fisheries. In 2019, measures were made more flexible. In 2020, we no longer had a static zone. There was a dynamic zone that came after all that. 2020, a few changes here and there. What leads you to say that we can't make the measures even more flexible in a very responsible way? Because I think that if my colleagues around the table had a chance to look at the briefing we got from the Library of Parliament and the map for this year, the Gulf of St. Lawrence was practically shut completely. The crab quotas were caught but there's this uncertainty in the early season for plant workers and harvesters and the community. So what makes you say that these measures couldn't be made even more flexible to give a little respite and have a much more normal season while protecting the right whale? Well, we are prepared to make changes to our measures by working with the industry and those who are impacted by the protection measures for the right whale. And of course, we'll do that this fall. We're going to call meetings with the industry so that it can tell us where we could improve things without reducing the level of protection of right whales. But if we can identify measures that could help them better in doing their fishery effectively and economically, we're prepared to do it.
Here around the table, the dynamic closure. Can you just explain very briefly what are the dynamic? How do we do that? Like when a whale comes in or two whale comes in, we put I know them, but can you just explain that to our committee members? Like how do we do that when the whales enter a particular area?
I absolutely can, and I will note that the change from the earlier years where we had the static closure to what we have now, which I will explain, is
and maybe what we have now, Mr. Burnett.
Yeah, and it is an example of how we have changed our measures to respond to the industry. And so what we have now is if we see a North Atlantic right whale or have a confirmed acoustic detection of a North Atlantic right whale, we close an area of about 2,000 square kilometers around that whale for 15 days. If during the second week of that closure we spot another whale in the same area, then the implicated zone becomes a seasonal closure, which is closed until November 15th. Otherwise, those areas reopen and the harvesters can return to those areas. When we cite that and when we initiate the closure, we obviously can't have harvesters snap their fingers and have the gear out of the water. So they're given a minimum 48 hours, but often longer if weather conditions require that, because obviously human safety is the paramount consideration.
Okay, perfect. So we use acoustic buoy, right, to detect whales. We use also plane to detect whales when they enter the area. And you said DFO, Coast Guard, boats, and other type of vessel that we use. So why we cannot use those devices, those tools, to also reopen a zone? Like, for example, there's a whale that came in, and I think the acoustic buoy detects a whale, I think it's 40 or 60 kilometers around it, right? And the whale from my knowledge, I think swim and not stay in the same place. And I think we know, not precisely, but we have a good sense on where they, they all like gather together since a couple of years. So why don't we use those same device to reopen some zone? Because in some of the zone that we close, like for all season, for the season long, whales are not even coming back there once they go to that zone. So why don't we use those same tool to reopen the zone? This will be a solution, for example.
Cormier, I'll ask for the officials to probably supply that answer in writing as your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Burns, I don't know if it's Mr. or Doctor, but it's Mr. In your opening statement, you said there are 336 animals and that they are in decline. In the early 1970s, DFO was reporting that there were 250 right whales, and that was, I believe, the first time that DFO and the industry worked together to change things. They changed the season dates. The Coast Guard moved major shipping lanes to direct them to St. John, New Brunswick, because they were mainly feeding in Briar Island. That feeding pattern has obviously changed now. So I'm not sure that it's fair, if you take the longer term, to call them a species in decline. That's a 34% increase in an endangered species since the 1970s because of all of the various things and the monitoring that has happened. So I wouldn't say it's a species in decline. Perhaps it is in the last couple of years, but it isn't over the time from when we started to implement measures to protect them.
So certainly over the longer term trajectory, this population is significantly smaller than it was historically. And in recent years, for example, in sort of the mid 20 teens, is that what you say? In the sort of around 20, yes, but in recent years, the population had been increasing and then it has started to decrease again. And so that's why its current trend we would characterize as being one of decreasing.
What's it decreased from and in what period of time?
So in 2017, when we had the increase in mortalities and, of course, the increase at new distribution in the Gulf of St. Lawrence at that magnitude of aggregation, it was at around 400 animals. And since 2017, it's dropped to 356 in 2019 and approximately 336 now.
How many of those have died in U.S. waters?
So we could provide you with that information. In some instances, the assessments that it's primarily the New England Aquarium that does a lot of this tracking, and sometimes an animal is essentially declared dead because it hasn't been observed for a number of years, and the level of surveillance in Canadian U.S. waters is sufficient that if you go a certain amount of time, it's sort of a scientific assumption that animal is deceased. And so these are obviously estimates. We don't see every animal every year, and so it's not a hard number like a census, but it is a fairly accurate assessment, I think.
Natural mortality, how they can live 40 years or longer. Do you have a sense in all the science you've done of what the natural mortality rate is?
Unlike other species, the known life history of right whales is not actually well known because they're not known to die of natural causes. They're typically dying at around 40-year mark because they typically get killed by entanglements or ship strike.
Though over the last few years, as per your earlier testimony, of the deaths and then necropsies that have been done have been undetermined. So is it not possible that by the time, because of the decomposition is one of the reasons, that by the time that we notice them, find them, do the necropsy, that they would have died of natural causes, in spite of the fact that they may have scars like you or I may have for other things from their long life?
So, we're not veterinarians. We're not experts to speak to that, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the potential causes for undetermined cause of death.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I do think it's a concern, though, but the biggest category is undetermined, and there's only been one entanglement of one crab gear that was a cause over the last 5 years. But I'll move on to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. This is probably more a statement than anything, but as you've testified and others have testified, they were provided with obviously the information on what we're doing, and obviously from the report they chose to ignore it for whatever their political reason is. I'm not sure that anyone in Canada, the U.S. should take any lessons from them, since they are an aquarium and they do have a shark pen where they keep sharks. They do keep sea otters. They do keep seals and sea lions. Perhaps somebody should be doing an investigation into their ethics and what they're doing, and whether or not anybody should attend that aquarium or fund their supposed research.
Perkins, that use of your 5 minutes has expired. We'll now go back to Mr. Cormier. 5 minutes or less.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'm going to give my time to Mr. Morrissey.
It's very kind of you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the question my colleague raised, and you did not get a chance to answer, because you have very sophisticated sighting technology that has been very effective at closing a zone for fishing. Why do you not use the same very sophisticated technology and sighting mechanism to reopen a zone?
So I'll preface my answer once again by saying I am not a marine biologist. However,
no, all due respect, I did not ask you as a marine biologist. I asked you as the Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries. Why the data that allowed you to make a very informed decision, and fishers want to see the department to continue in that way, but why you will not use the same very sophisticated technology to reopen an area when it's obvious there's no whales present?
It does relate to North Atlantic right whale behavior. As I understand it, North Atlantic right whales vocalizing, singing, is a behavior that is not something they do all the time. And so while the presence of singing or the detection of singing is a clear positive confirmation of their presence, the absence of it is not confirmation of their absence. That is to say, in many instances, whales can be present in an area and not be vocalizing. It's the nature of North Atlantic right whale behavior. And so it is...
It's only one of your methodology to detect. And you
correct.
You do not rely on one method, you rely on a multiple.
That's correct. And so the reopening of the areas under the dynamic protocol is based on aerial surveillance. And so if we do the overflights and determine that the whales are no longer present in the area, as long as it hasn't resulted in a season-long closure, then those areas would be reopened. And so the areas that are under the dynamic
season-long closing, when it becomes obvious to you through the detection sources you have, that you would stick with a season-long closing, knowing that the whales had already moved. And I'm questioning this. I'm questioning this in the pretext that no one more than fishers today, and really because of the situation in the U.S., their awareness has gone even higher, that we must take all steps to protect the whales, and we're doing that. But at the same token, the department has access to very sophisticated technology paid for by the taxpayer of Canada, and that methodology should be used to allow the fishers to reduce their fishing effort, reduce their carbon footprint by sending them all over the place to avoid these zones. And the department has access to it. Why are you not using it for the benefit of the fishers?
So the aerial assets dedicated by both Transport Canada and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Conservation Protection and Science are targeting areas where there are closures. The first step is a dynamic closure. Just to be clear, seasonal closures don't kick in right away. They only occur if there's repeated detections of right whales in a given area and aggregating, because what our comprehensive surveillance program has determined is that there are areas in the Gulf St. Lawrence, for example, that they do aggregate for extended periods of time, and they'll move and come back in the same period throughout the summer. The right whale period in the Gulf St. Lawrence is largely between May and November. So they are moving around and aggregating in various spots in the Gulf St. Lawrence. Our Transport Canada colleagues also base their measures on aggregations and how often they aggregate. The challenge is that aggregation changes every year, but we do see high numbers of aggregations in given spots in the Gulf St. Lawrence, and that's largely where the seasonal closures end up, not surprisingly, because there's repeated detections of right whales using our assets, both acoustic and aerial surveillance.
Oh. So in access to the aggregated information you have, it determines when you do the first closure, which is the same criteria that is being used. I do not believe you've adequately addressed why you could not use the same information to reopen zones and therefore allow fishers to fish closer to home and reduce their fuel consumption. That's an issue, and I simply ask you to take that in consideration.
Morrissey. We'll go on now to Madam Debbie N for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not allowed to show it, but I have before me the internet site by GREM, a research group on marine mammals for the St. Lawrence River. This is a nonprofit organization that does very advanced research on sea mammal behavior. Does DFO have cooperation with a number of organizations of that nature for the Gulf of St. Lawrence? Yes, that's a good question.
It is an organization among several others, Campbell Whale Rescue Team, Tangley Whales in Newfoundland, Marine Animal Response Society in the Atlantic, but also the Pacific, that we have partnerships under the Marine Mammal Response Program, the national program in Canada to deal with marine mammal incidents. So we have a very close working relationship with GREM, and in fact work with them on response on an annual basis and a budget to work with those organizations to make sure they have the resources to do that safely.
They have methods, I'm getting back to this issue, that may reduce zones and the frequency of closures with some predictability. I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but there is that experience at GREN to anticipate such and such a whale, a blue whale, for example, a very big one. There are whale watching tours. We try to minimize the impact of these whale watching tours. Couldn't that kind of exercise apply even more, in more serious and assiduous way, so that we could reduce the zones and have greater predictability? I know we have to ask that question of scientists, but what's your impression of this?
One of the things, and I will say this in English because some of the words I don't know in French, one of the things that DFO Science is engaged in is studying predictive factors for the distribution of the food source for North Atlantic right whales, Calanus, which is a really very small, they're a huge animal, but they eat really small organisms in the water. And so one of the reasons that our scientists are doing that work is to see if there are ways that we couldn't better predict where the aggregations of North Atlantic right whales will develop. That work is not to a point where we can align management measures with that, but it is certainly one of the many pieces of work that we're looking at doing over the mid to long term that might bring greater predictability, greater certainty, and less impacts on the fishing industry. And so that work will obviously hopefully continue.
We'll go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Build off a little bit on some of the questions that were being asked by my colleague, Mr. Perkins. Specifically, some context. We know that much of our fisheries practices, both present and past and hopefully not moving in the future, are based on very colonial practices. And we know that the right to fish for food, social, and ceremonial purposes is protected under Section 35 of the Constitution. This is information that we all know. We also know that it's important that through a process of reconciliation with First Nations that we are not purposely or not pegging First Nation fishers against non-Indigenous fishers and vice versa. And so I want to ensure that we have an opportunity to hear from you a little bit more around what work is being done to ensure that these processes are being done effectively alongside First Nations, and to ensure that we're not reinforcing a narrative that can create more division at a time when we need to come together.
Thanks for the question. And so as it Indigenous, communal, commercial, and moderate livelihood fishing activities are subject in our Maritimes region to the same closure protocols as other commercial activities. In terms of FSC fishing, our regional colleagues are currently working with First Nations to better understand their needs and to ultimately further integrate the FSC harvesting into the department's overall approach to protecting North Atlantic right whales and other marine mammals as well. And so that meaningful consultation needs to be undertaken in advance of applying the same closure protocols to those FSC fisheries. The nations certainly were informed when these whale sightings occurred so that they could respond appropriately based on their determinations. But that meaningful consultation is underway so that we can better understand their particular circumstances and work with them to find a path forward.
10 seconds left, so we'll move on now to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go back to my earlier question of both of you when I asked what other Canadian fisheries operations are you aware of that have been targeted by foreign NGOs? You mentioned the seal hunt. What other fisheries operations have been affected by messaging activities by foreign NGOs?
Well, I don't have a list in front of me to speak to that, so I wouldn't want to mislead the committee. But certainly, the seal harvest is a good example of that, and I'm sure that there have been other transboundary fisheries, Canada to the U.S. Perhaps Pacific salmon, perhaps the mackerel fishery on the East Coast are two that come to mind that may have been subject to that as well. It's not something that we would have a specific listing of, and so I again don't want to mislead you on that.
How long have you been in this role with the department?
I've been a DFO for a fair amount of time, and I've given you the examples that come to mind today for you.
Okay, thank you. Further examples on the West Coast are recreational fisheries, are salmon aquaculture, certainly come to my mind as well. How can Canada better combat those attacks, if you want to call them that, on sustainable fisheries here in Canada when we see local fish harvesters, commercial, Indigenous, recreational, all being impacted by media spins that are put out there?
Yeah, we're working very diligently to try to ensure that Canada's world-class management regime is understood by these organizations. Unfortunately, sometimes their approaches might not be fully informed by fact, and so we can't always prevent all of those sorts of assertions to be made. But our strategy is to work with Canadian representatives in the U.S., like the consulate in Boston, that's actively engaged with political leadership as well as other groups to ensure that those facts are well understood by all involved, so that we can have so that they can have a fair understanding of the great work that Canada is doing, that Canadian industry is doing, to have sustainable fisheries that are aiming to coexist with, amongst other things, marine mammals.
Are there activities from other countries that are impacting Canadian fisheries operations that you're aware of?
I'm not sure I quite follow that.
NGOs, you mentioned the U.S. You're working close with the U.S. counterparts. Are there any other countries that you're working with on similar issues?
Oh, for sure. Like, for example, in the European Union and in Scandinavia a few years back, there were concerns around the humane treatment of lobsters in cooking practices. And so, we undertook significant advocacy work there to make sure that sort of those realities were understood by those groups. And that appears to have largely worked. That's not sort of a communications line that we tend to hear of more recently.
In 2018, in the fall 2018 report from the Commissioner on the Environment and Sustainable Development on the protection of marine mammals, made a recommendations that Fisheries and Oceans Canada undertake. Have the recommendations made in the audit been implemented, and has the increased funding been spent?
In short, I don't have the full list of recommendations in front of me to give you the accurate details, but absolutely that's an audit that we're acutely aware of and have a management action plan associated with it and are in the process of or have implemented measures to respond to all of those recommendations.
The increased funding that was provided, has it been spent?
Has
it been spent, the increased funding?
Yeah, so I mean, that would be linked back to the Whales Initiative, for example, and the $167 million there, and all of those investments are underway. We've spoken of things like the Whale Safe Gear Adoption Fund and the Go Skier Fund, both of which are in course now with funding going to various groups. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Reynolds. Now to finish us up in this line of questioning today, Mr. Cormier, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the industry and the harvesters, some of them are listening to us, for the efforts they've made to protect whales in the past few years, and clarify it's not all environmental groups that are against what we do. There are many environmental groups in my region that work hand in hand with the industry, and we'll probably hear them before the committee. They do extraordinary work. Everyone understood here that we have to work together, and the fishermen are certainly part of the solution to help us protect the right whale and have responsible fisheries so that we can continue to practice this wonderful trade for years to come.
I don't want to go back to those measure or tools that we use, but we're certainly going to come back at that at a point. But one thing that is, I think, problematic in the near future is like you said, we're using traps with no rope now. What a great tool that we use, still in development. Still some hiccups here and there, but I think we're going to get there. But there's the weak rope also that we want to put in place for the next season. And I think and I hope that there's some group that are testing those rope that almost everybody said we're not ready for those rope. We're not ready to use those rope. If we use these rope, they're going to break. We're going to have more ropes in the water. Where are you at with this situation right now? And my point of view and the point of the industry and also the environmental group is that we should put a pause on that and make sure that we have good ropes in time that will not break, instead of having something that will maybe prevent some more entanglement and damage, again, some of what we're seeing coming from the U.S. of saying that we don't have good measure in place. So what do you hear on that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, certainly as far as having an informed decision on the approach to implementing a whale safe gear program and requirements, that is the reason why we've been working with industry. We've had almost 100 engagement sessions with the fishing industry. We've funded various research initiatives, weak rope, ropeless gear initiatives, that sort of thing. And certainly all of that information is what we're currently assessing and looking at. There's no doubt, though, despite our massive surveillance program, we don't know where each whale is at all times. And certainly that is good reason to make sure that the gear that is in the water is as safe as possible for North Atlantic right whales. As we mentioned, the potential biological removal identified by the U.S. is less than 1. And so we do need to look at these at these measures, and we'll do so in a manner that is informed by all of the work that we've been doing in recent years with industry, so that we can limit the amount of unintended consequences. Certainly, we've heard things about risk of ghost gear and that sort of thing, and are acutely aware of that and assessing all of that information.
So thank you on that. And just a little bit earlier, I'm glad that I hear you say, and I don't want to quote you wrong, but I think you said that, we're maybe going to look at, soften the measure for next year. And, maybe I think there's a possibility that we do that without like compromising any of the measure that we put in place so far. And we're not like compromising like, some more debt or entanglement, and helping the industry and some community also at the same time. So what are you seeing as of now in terms of changes to some of those measures? For example, what we just talked about using those same tool to maybe reopen some zone, or maybe like instead of having one whale in a particular spot, maybe having 2 or 3 whales. I know the industry are proposing that to you. I know also some environmental group are proposing that to you. Because when all those zones close, I think you know how it's sometimes like chaotic. Everybody has to remove their trap, fishing in the same place, maybe more dangerous for entanglement. So what are you seeing in terms of some of those measures that we can soften and still, I think, be complying or still be viewed as a country that, wants to protect right whales and at the same time, like want to have a responsible fishery?
So in terms of softening measures, I think probably or hopefully what I said was more in the line of modifying measures,
That's good for me.
keeping in mind the need to maintain the level of protection of North Atlantic right whales. I wouldn't want to prejudge the process. Each year we go through a process of evaluating what worked, what didn't work, what measures might be able to be adjusted to better respond to industry observations and comments. And so that process will be undertaken again this fall. And we will be holding our North Atlantic Right Whale Advisory Committee later this fall, which is one of the multiple touch points with the fishing industry for them to have the opportunity to speak with us about, as I say, what's worked and what could work better. And so we will do that, and we will assess all of that information. And as has been the case for the past several years, the minister will make her determinations around what the appropriate measures would be for next year, following the analysis of all of that information.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. And of course, as previously mentioned, we would end off this particular meeting to take time to go into camera. I want to say a special thank you to Mr. Burns, Mr. Gilchrist for their appearance here today, and great knowledge for the start of this particular study. Yes, Mr. Morrissey.
There's an item I'd like to bring up, but when the witnesses are cleared.
If you like, if it's got to do with committee. So we'll suspend now for a few minutes to switch over to in-camera, and when the clerk tells me it's good to go, we'll start up again. Meeting suspended.
you.